My name is Evelyn Mercer, and I was 61 years old when my only son sold my car while I was recovering from spinal surgery. It was a silver 2021 Toyota Highlander with 38,412 miles on it, a blue hospital parking permit hanging from the mirror, and a small dent beside the rear taillight that I had never bothered repairing. When my neighbor drove me home on October 18, I saw the empty space beside the temporary wheelchair ramp before she even stopped the car. My son Caleb had told me the Highlander was at a dealership for an oil change. 3 weeks later, I would sit across from that dealership's compliance manager while she placed a recorded telephone call, a signed collection form, and a photograph of my spare key on the table. The person who collected the sale proceeds had not been Caleb. That raised a question no mother should ever have to ask. If my son had not taken the money himself, who had he sold my independence for? I did not call him immediately. I gripped the plastic handle of my walker and stared at the pale rectangle where the tires had protected the concrete from years of weather. "That's not an oil change," my neighbor Denise said quietly. "No," I replied, "it isn't. At Calm Story House, we tell stories about the moment usefulness stops mistaken for love. Subscribe, and tell me where you would have drawn the line." Before my surgery, I had spent 34 years managing payroll for a regional construction company. My job was to notice when numbers that looked ordinary did not belong together. A missing hour here, a duplicate reimbursement there. One employee supposedly working in 2 counties on the same afternoon. Caleb had always joked that I could smell an incorrect decimal point from across the room. That afternoon, I smelled something worse. Inside the house, my recovery chair had been positioned beside the living room window. Caleb had stocked the refrigerator with soup, yogurt, and enough bottled water to survive a minor drought. A handwritten medication schedule was taped to the cabinet. He had done just enough to make me feel guilty for doubting him. I lowered myself into the chair and called. "Mom," he answered brightly. "You home? Where is my car?" A pause followed, not long. Maybe 2 seconds. Payroll had taught me that 2 seconds could contain an entire confession. "I told you. Hartwell Auto is servicing it." "Which location?" "The one near Mill Creek." Hartwell had no location near Mill Creek. I looked at the spare key hook beside my kitchen door. Empty. "When will it be back?" "Couple days. You can't drive yet anyway." There it was, the phrase Caleb used whenever he had already decided something for me. "You don't need it right now." He said he had to go and ended the call before I could ask another question. I should have contacted the police that afternoon. Instead, I told myself there might be an explanation. That was my weakness. I could audit 500 employees without sentiment, but with Caleb, I kept allowing emotional credits against debts he had never repaid. Then I opened my desk drawer. The vehicle title was gone. So was the folder containing my insurance policy, registration, and the limited power of attorney I had signed before surgery. Authority Caleb was supposed to use only if a medical emergency left me unable to manage my bills. Under the empty folder sat a bank notice dated 9 days earlier. Someone had attempted to add a second authorized user to my savings account. The missing car was not the beginning. It was simply the first empty space I had been forced to notice. In our family, I had always been the person who handled what no one else wanted to touch. When Caleb was 9, his father, Martin, left after 17 years of marriage. He did not disappear completely. He sent birthday cards, called on holidays, and paid child support often enough to avoid being taken back to court. But the daily responsibilities stayed with me. I learned to make one paycheck cover school shoes, dental work, a leaking roof, and the occasional baseball fee Caleb remembered to mention the night before it was due. My mother used to say, "Evelyn always lands on her feet." It sounded like praise until I realized it was permission to let me fall. By the time Caleb was an adult, everyone expected me to be the same woman who could solve a crisis before dinner and return the casserole dish by Sunday. When he dropped out of community college at 20, I paid the balance on his apartment so he would not be evicted. At 26, I covered the deductible after he backed his truck into a concrete pillar. At 32, when his marriage to Vanessa collapsed under credit card debt, I gave them $8,000 from the account I had been building for retirement repairs. Caleb always thanked me. Vanessa always called it helping the family stay afloat. Neither of them ever asked what I had gone without. Denise was the only person who challenged the arrangement. She lived across the street and had known me since our sons played Little League together. "You aren't helping him stand," she told me once. "You're making sure he never feels the ground." I was offended because she was right. Caleb could be thoughtful in ways that made his dependence easy to excuse. He remembered the brand of coffee I liked. He replaced my porch light without being asked. After my spinal stenosis worsened, he drove me to 2 specialist appointments and sat beside me while the surgeon explained the risks. When surgery was scheduled for September 29, Caleb said, "Let me handle things while you recover." He placed his hand over mine on the kitchen table. Vanessa sat beside him, nodding with grave importance. "You shouldn't have to worry about bills or errands," she said. You need to heal. I wanted to believe I had raised a son who had finally become dependable. My attorney prepared a limited power of attorney authorizing Caleb to pay utilities, communicate with my insurer, and access one checking account if complications left me unable to act. It did not authorize him to sell property. It did not cover my savings. It expired on November 15. I read every line before signing. Caleb laughed when I explained the limits. Mom, I'm not planning a hostile takeover. Vanessa smiled, but she did not laugh. I placed the original in a brown folder, wrote surgery, emergency only across the tab, and locked it in the second drawer of my desk. The title to the Highlander was behind it because the dealership had mailed it after I paid off the loan that spring. Before leaving for the hospital, I handed Caleb the spare house key. This is temporary, I said. You always say that like I'm 16. You'll always be my son. That doesn't make everything mine yours. His expression tightened for half a second, then softened again. Of course not. That was the promise beneath every document we signed, and every responsibility I handed him. He was there to protect what belonged to me, not decide that I no longer needed it. The morning after I found the empty drawer, I called every Hartwell dealership within 50 miles. The first two had no record of my Highlander. At the third, a receptionist asked for the vehicle identification number. I read it from an old insurance email because the registration was missing. Her keyboard clicked for several seconds. Yes, Mom, she said. That vehicle was purchased by our pre-owned department on October 7. I tightened my hand around the phone. Purchased from whom? There was a careful pause. The paperwork lists you as the seller. I was in a rehabilitation facility on October 7. Her voice changed immediately. Less customer service, more caution. She transferred me to a manager named Raymond Pike, who asked me to confirm my address, date of birth, and the last 4 digits of my driver's license. Then he said the dealership had paid $24,600 for the Highlander. The check had already cleared. Where was it sent? I asked. It wasn't mailed. The seller requested in-person collection. Who collected it? I can't release that over the phone. I looked toward the walker beside my chair. My surgeon had told me not to ride in a car longer than 20 minutes unless necessary. Hartwell was 45 minutes away. It is necessary, I said. Denise drove me that afternoon. At the dealership, Raymond met us in a glass-walled office behind the showroom. He was in his 50s, with rimless glasses and the nervous courtesy of a man who had recently discovered a transaction might become evidence. He placed copies of the sale documents in front of me. The signature looked almost like mine, almost. My real signature slanted slightly to the right. This one leaned left and ended with an exaggerated loop beneath the final letter. Vanessa had watched me sign birthday cards, school forms, and checks for years. She had copied the shape but not the pressure. Payroll signatures taught me that imitation usually focused on appearance. Authentic writing carried habit. A photocopy of my driver's license was attached, along with the limited power of attorney. This document doesn't authorize the sale, I said. Raymond adjusted his glasses. Our purchasing agent believed your son was acting with your permission. My son signed as a witness, not as my representative. At the bottom of the buyer's checklist was another entry: seller unable to attend due to surgery. Verbal confirmation obtained by telephone. I felt something cold settle beneath my ribs. I never spoke to anyone here. Raymond turned his monitor slightly away and typed. All transaction calls are recorded, he said. Compliance will need to review it. He also showed me the collection receipt. The $24,600 cashier's check had been picked up 2 days later by Vanessa Mercer. She had presented her own identification and signed her name in neat, upright letters. There was no imitation on that page. Beside the receipt was a photograph taken for the dealership's records. Vanessa stood at the payment counter, holding the envelope in one hand and my spare car key in the other. She was wearing the cream cardigan I had given her the previous Christmas. I stared at the photograph until Denise touched my shoulder. Raymond said the Highlander had already been sold at auction to a dealer in another state. Recovering it might be complicated. The dealership would freeze its internal file and contact its insurer. But first I needed to make a formal report. Caleb called while we were still in the parking lot. Mom, why are you making this into some criminal thing? I turned the phone to speaker. Because someone forged my signature and sold my property. You weren't going to drive for months. We needed the money. We? Silence. Then he said Vanessa was trying to keep us from losing the house. There it was, not an apology, a justification. I had spent years paying to prevent Caleb from experiencing consequences. Now he had decided my property was another emergency fund. I called my bank first and froze every account he had ever accessed. Then I called my attorney. The police report came third. By sunset, Caleb had left 7 voicemails. I listened to none of them. For the first time, I understood that returning to normal would not mean restoring peace. It would mean teaching them that my signature, my money, and my consent were available whenever their lives became uncomfortable. My attorney, Laura Chen, obtained the dealership file before the end of the week. The police had classified the matter as suspected forgery and unauthorized sale of property, but Laura warned me that an investigation would not restore my car quickly. Hartwell's insurer needed time to determine whether the dealership had followed its verification procedures. The out-of-state dealer had already sold the Highlander to a private buyer who appeared to have purchased it legally. Several people can be wrong here, Laura said, without the final buyer being the person who wronged you. That was the kind of sentence adults dislike because it is both fair and inconvenient. The $24,600 cashier's check had been deposited into a joint account belonging to Caleb and Vanessa on October 10. By October 13, the account contained less than $400. They had paid $9,800 toward overdue mortgage payments, $6,300 to a credit card company, and nearly $5,000 to a business called Willow and Thread Home Market. I knew the name. Vanessa had spent 2 years talking about opening an online home decor store. She described it as business, although most of its inventory had been stacked in their garage beneath Christmas decorations and a broken treadmill. The remaining money had gone toward utilities, vehicle payments, groceries, and a cash withdrawal of $1,200. They had not stolen my car during one reckless afternoon. They had prepared a budget for the proceeds. My sister, Elaine, called after Caleb spoke to her. He says you told him he could sell it if your recovery took longer than expected. I did not. He says there was confusion. There was a forged signature. Elaine sighed as though I had chosen an unnecessarily harsh noun. They were about to lose their house, Evelyn. They have 2 children, so they sold my car. You couldn't drive it. There it was again. You don't need it right now. Only now the phrase had traveled through the family and returned dressed as reason. I asked Elaine whether she would sign over her retirement account because Caleb had mishandled his mortgage. That's different. Why? She did not answer. Instead, she said I should think carefully before putting my son through the criminal system. By Sunday, Caleb's version had reached 3 cousins and my former mother-in-law. According to him, I had agreed to help, then become confused after surgery medication. Vanessa had merely collected a check I had authorized. The dealership had misunderstood a family arrangement. It was a clever story because it used my surgery to make my memory the unreliable part. For one terrible hour, I wondered whether I had said something vague before the operation. Perhaps Caleb had asked about the car while I was distracted. Perhaps I had replied, "We'll figure it out." Then I opened the notebook I had kept during surgical preparation. Payroll had made documentation a reflex. I had written every medication, appointment, emergency contact, and instruction in dated entries. On September 27, I had recorded a conversation with Caleb. Car stays at the house. No sale, loan transfer, or trade, he agreed. I remembered writing it because he had asked whether he could borrow the Highlander while his truck was being repaired. The next morning, Hartwell's compliance manager, Marisol Grant, called me. We located the verbal authorization recording, she said. The woman identified herself as you, but she gave an incorrect answer to one of our verification questions. Which question? The purchase price of the vehicle. Only Caleb, Vanessa, and I knew what I had paid. Marisol paused before continuing. There is something else. The caller's voice may appear in another recording from the day the check was collected. For the first time since seeing the empty driveway, I was not being asked to defend my memory. Someone else had preserved it for me. Hartwell arranged for me to hear the recordings at Laura's office, rather than make another trip to the dealership. Marisol joined by video call. Before playing anything, she explained that the recordings were part of an active insurance investigation and could not be distributed without formal authorization. Laura could take notes, and the police could request certified copies. The first call lasted 6 minutes. A woman introduced herself as Evelyn Mercer and said she wanted Caleb to complete the sale because she was recovering from surgery. Her voice was pitched lower than normal, each word delivered too carefully. I recognized Vanessa before she finished my address. She knew my birth date and driver's license number. She correctly named the hospital where I had undergone surgery. When the purchasing agent asked what I had originally paid for the Highlander, she said $32,000. I had paid $41,870. The agent hesitated but continued after Caleb came onto the line and said, "She's still foggy from the medication." Laura stopped writing. That sentence hurt more than the imitation. Caleb had not merely allowed Vanessa to pretend to be me. He had supplied an explanation for every mistake she made. The second recording came from the payment counter. Vanessa was speaking in her normal voice while an employee prepared the cashier's check. "You did a good job sounding like her," Caleb said in the background. Vanessa laughed softly. "She makes everything sound like an audit." Then Caleb said, "Once this mortgage current, she'll calm down. She always does. No one confessed to forgery. No one used the word steal." They spoke like 2 people correcting an inconvenience before I could object. Marisol's face remained professionally still. "We failed to complete an enhanced identity check after the incorrect answer," she said. "Hartwell accepts that our process was not followed." That did not bring back the Highlander, but it was the first institution involved that had admitted responsibility without asking me to soften the facts. The dealership offered to pay for a temporary rental while its insurer reviewed my claim. Because I still could not drive, Denise was added as an approved driver. The first morning she arrived in a white rental sedan. She opened the passenger door and said, "Your chariot is aggressively beige." I laughed harder than the joke deserved. She took me to physical therapy, the pharmacy, and the bank, where I closed the checking account Caleb had been authorized to use. I moved my savings to a new institution, changed every password, and revoked the power of attorney. At home, I hired a locksmith. Watching him replace the front door cylinder made me feel both safer and ashamed. That evening, I reached automatically for my phone to tell Caleb how therapy had gone. For 36 years, he had been the person I called with ordinary news. A raised dosage, a strange neighbor, a television show we both disliked. Betrayal did not erase that reflex. It only made the silence after it feel unnatural. Then my granddaughter Lily sent me a voice message. "Grandma, Dad says you're mad because he borrowed your car. Can I still come make cinnamon toast when you're better?" She was 9. I nearly called Caleb and offered to withdraw the complaint if he stopped involving the children. The temptation was immediate and humiliating. I wanted access to Lily and her brother Noah more than I wanted to be right. But I understood the bargain beneath that impulse. Caleb would return the grandchildren to my kitchen, and I would return the lie to silence. Instead, Laura sent him written notice that all communication about the vehicle must go through her. She also stated that using the children to pressure me would be documented. 3 days later, Hartwell's insurer confirmed in writing that it would compensate me for the Highlander's verified market value if its investigation supported the dealership's procedural failure. It was not a settlement yet, it was not justice. But for the first time since surgery, I had transportation arranged, my account secured, and a written acknowledgement that the empty space in my driveway had not been created by confusion. Hartwell's insurer completed its review on November 12. The dealership offered me $27,940. The Highlander's documented market value, plus sales tax, registration costs, and reimbursement for the belongings that had disappeared with it. Laura reviewed the release carefully. It resolved my claim against Hartwell but preserved my right to pursue Caleb and Vanessa for the fraudulent transaction. I signed. 2 weeks later, Denise drove me to a different dealership, where I bought a dark green Honda CR-V with fewer miles and a lower step into the passenger seat. My physical therapist had suggested something easier to enter while my back regained strength. Before leaving the lot, I removed the blue hospital parking permit from my purse and hung it from the mirror. It had once marked me as temporarily dependent. Now it reminded me that temporary dependence was not permanent permission. I paid cash from the insurance settlement and placed the new title in a safe deposit box. Laura kept a certified copy. No spare key went on the hook beside my kitchen door. The measurable progress was small but undeniable. I began driving myself to therapy. I walked from the driveway to the mailbox without the walker. I returned to my former office one afternoon for lunch, and the payroll team gave me a coffee mug that read, "I the missing cent." Then the evidence became stronger. A Hartwell purchasing assistant named Jasmine Cole contacted the investigating officer. She remembered Caleb because he had visited the dealership 4 days before the sale paperwork was completed. According to her statement, he asked whether a vehicle could be sold while the titled owner was hospitalized. When Jasmine explained that the owner would need to appear or provide valid authority, Caleb said, "My mother signs whatever I put in front of her." Jasmine told him the limited power of attorney would have to authorize a vehicle transfer specifically. The document did not. Caleb returned later with Vanessa and claimed another employee had already approved the arrangement. That mattered. It showed they had been warned before they forged my signature and staged the telephone confirmation. Confusion was becoming harder to sell. Caleb noticed the change before I told him. Denise posted a photograph of me beside the CR-V after my first solo drive. Nothing dramatic. I was holding a pharmacy bag and squinting into the November sun. Elaine called that evening. "So you bought another car?" I did. Caleb saw the picture. He feels replaced. I looked at the new key in my palm. "He sold my vehicle, Elaine. I replaced transportation, not a son." She became quiet, then said his mortgage lender had issued another default notice. Willow and Thread had failed, and Vanessa's supplier was demanding payment. Caleb had hired an attorney after learning about Jasmine's statement. Suddenly, they wanted peace. Would you have trusted an apology that arrived only after the evidence became expensive? 2 days later, Laura forwarded a proposal from Caleb's lawyer. Caleb and Vanessa would sign a repayment agreement for $24,600, beginning with $200 a month. In exchange, I would tell the prosecutor I considered the matter a private misunderstanding and did not want charges pursued. At that rate, repayment would take more than 10 years without interest. They also requested supervised visits between me and the grandchildren, describing them as proof of good faith family reconciliation. I read the phrase twice. The children had been turned into another payment term. That Friday, a cream envelope arrived from Elaine. Inside was an invitation to Thanksgiving dinner at her house, with a handwritten note beneath the printed menu. Caleb will be there. He wants to apologize without lawyers controlling the conversation. Please come for the children. Tucked behind the invitation was a drawing from Lily, Grandma and Dad standing beside a green car, holding hands. I wanted that picture to be possible. But I had spent a career learning that when someone rushed you past the paperwork, it was usually because the paperwork said no. I went to Thanksgiving dinner because I wanted to see my grandchildren, not because I believed an apology made without lawyers would somehow become more honest. Before leaving home, I photographed Lily's drawing and placed the original in my desk. I also told Laura where I was going. Denise offered to drive, but I wanted my own car in Elaine's driveway and my own key in my pocket. Caleb's truck was already there. Lily opened the door before I knocked. She wrapped both arms around my waist, then remembered my back and pulled away so quickly that her face crumpled. I didn't hurt you, did I? No, sweetheart. Noah hugged me more cautiously. He was 12 and old enough to understand that every adult in the room was pretending dinner was ordinary. Elaine had placed me beside Lily and across from Caleb. Vanessa sat at the far end, wearing the expression of someone attending a meeting she considered unfair. For 20 minutes, everyone discussed school, football, and whether the turkey was dry. Then Elaine cleared the plates and said, "Maybe we should give this family a chance to heal." Caleb placed his napkin on the table. "Mom, I'm sorry things got out of control." I waited. "We were desperate," he continued. "The kids could have lost their home. I thought you'd understand once you knew why. You told the dealership I was confused from medication." His jaw tightened. "Because they were making the process impossible. They were trying to confirm my consent." Vanessa finally looked at me. "We made the mortgage current. We didn't take a vacation." As though responsible spending could transform theft into sacrifice. Caleb leaned forward. "We're offering to repay you $200 a month. It's what we can afford. And in return, I call forgery a misunderstanding." His eyes moved toward Lily. "I'm asking you not to destroy this family over a car." Lily stared down at her plate. That was the moment I understood why Caleb wanted the conversation without lawyers. He wanted witnesses too young to recognize pressure, but old enough to remember that Grandma had refused peace. I set my water glass down. "I will not discuss the criminal investigation in front of the children." "We're not criminals," Vanessa snapped. Elaine touched her arm. "Let's stay calm." Caleb's voice softened. "Mom, come home with us after dinner. Spend the weekend. We can start over." For one breath, I imagined cinnamon toast in their kitchen, Lily beside me, Noah pretending not to listen to our conversation. I wanted the ordinary life being offered. But the price was pretending they had borrowed what they deliberately sold. "I'm not withdrawing my statement," I said, "and I won't exchange access to the children for silence." Caleb pushed his chair back. "So that's your answer?" "My answer is no." The room became very still. Lily reached under the table and took my hand. Caleb saw it and looked away. I stayed through dessert. That was my false victory. I believed refusing calmly had prevented the evening from becoming another weapon. The next morning, 3 relatives forwarded me the same post Vanessa had published online. She wrote that an elderly family member experiencing memory issues after surgery had falsely accused them of theft after voluntarily helping save her grandchildren's home. She did not use my name. She did not need to. By noon, Elaine was asking me to remain quiet so the situation would burn itself out. Instead, I sent Laura screenshots, names, dates, and every message I received. Caleb had mistaken my silence at dinner for hesitation. What he had actually heard was the last warning before I corrected the record. Vanessa's post remained online for 6 days. During that time, 2 relatives called to ask whether I was feeling more like myself, and a woman from church offered to bring me information about senior transportation. None of them asked whether Caleb had actually possessed permission to sell the Highlander. Laura sent Vanessa a formal demand to remove the post and preserve all related messages. She also prepared a concise written statement for anyone who contacted me. My vehicle was sold using a forged signature while I was hospitalized. The matter is supported by dealership records and is under investigation. I will not discuss it further. No insults, no medical history, no defense of my motherhood. Just the missing entry returned to the proper column. Vanessa deleted the post that evening, then replaced it with a message about being silenced by people with money for attorneys. I did not respond. The investigator later obtained copies of the bank records, Hartwell's audio files, Jasmine's statement, and the original limited power of attorney. Laura told me the prosecutor was considering fraud and forgery charges, but had offered to meet with both sides before deciding how to proceed. Caleb's attorney requested mediation first. The session would take place at Laura's office on December 14. 3 days before it, Elaine arrived at my house carrying a covered casserole and the brown emergency folder from my desk. I had assumed Caleb had destroyed it after removing the title. Elaine placed it on my kitchen table. "I found this in his garage," she said. It was inside a box of Vanessa's business receipts. The original power of attorney was still there, so was a yellow note in Vanessa's handwriting. Use hospital story. Say medication makes her inconsistent. See handles dealership. I collect check. For several seconds, all I could hear was the refrigerator humming. Elaine pressed both hands against the table. I didn't know, she said. You knew they sold the car. I believed you had agreed before surgery. And after I showed you the forged signature? Her eyes filled, but she did not look away. I chose the version that required the least from me. It was the first honest thing she had said. She told me Caleb had been terrified of losing the house because Martin had lost our home when Caleb was 17. Until then, I had not known how deeply that memory remained in him. He had watched strangers carry furniture onto the lawn while I was at work arranging temporary housing. That fear explained why he treated foreclosure like an approaching fire. It did not explain why he decided my property was the nearest extinguisher. Elaine pushed the folder toward me. Please don't use this to destroy him. I opened it and touched the empty plastic sleeve where my vehicle title had been. I'm going to use it to stop him from destroying me. That night, I listened to Lily's Thanksgiving voice message again. I wanted to preserve my place in her life. I wanted Caleb to apologize without calculation. I wanted the son who replaced my porch light to be more real than the man who had coached his wife through my identity. But wanting a different family did not make one available. I placed Lily's drawing, Vanessa's yellow note, the dealership photograph, and my new car key into the folder. Then I wrote one sentence on a clean sheet of paper and tucked it behind the power of attorney. Temporary dependence is not permanent permission. On the morning of the mediation, Caleb sent me a final text. You don't need to do this. I read it twice. Then I carried the brown folder into Laura's conference room and took the chair facing the door. Caleb entered Laura's conference room with Vanessa and their attorney, Stephen Rowe. Elaine arrived alone and sat near the window. She had agreed to provide the folder and explain where she found it, but she had not promised to take my side beyond the facts. That distinction mattered. Caleb looked thinner than he had at Thanksgiving. Vanessa carried a leather notebook against her chest. Neither of them greeted me. Stephen began with a prepared apology. My clients acknowledged that poor decisions were made under severe financial pressure. Laura slid the brown folder toward the center of the table. Poor decisions do not require forged signatures, impersonated telephone calls, and a written plan to discredit the victim's memory. Stephen stopped speaking. Laura removed the yellow note and placed it beside the dealership photograph. Vanessa's face changed before Caleb's did. That was just planning what to say, she muttered. Yes, I said. That is the problem. Caleb stared at Elaine. You went through our things? I found Evelyn's stolen folder while helping pack the garage, she replied. I returned it to its owner. Vanessa turned toward her. You're choosing her over the children. Elaine folded her hands. No, I'm choosing not to lie for you. It was not redemption. But it was the first cost she had accepted for telling the truth. Laura played a short section of the dealership recording. Vanessa's imitation of my voice filled the room. Then Caleb's own words followed. She's still foggy from the medication. Lowered his head. Stephen asked for a private break. Laura agreed, and the three of them left the room. Elaine looked at Lily's drawing inside the open folder. Do you think he'll ever forgive me? She asked. For returning evidence, for waiting so long. I turned my new car key between my fingers. Forgiveness is not the first entry due. When they returned, Stephen's tone had changed. Caleb and Vanessa were willing to sign a civil judgment for $2,600, sell Vanessa's remaining business inventory, and begin payments after their mortgage modification was approved. They would remove every online statement and issue a written correction to the relatives who had received their version. In return, they wanted me to ask the prosecutor for leniency. Caleb finally looked at me. Mom, you know I was trying to keep my family in our home. I know you were afraid. His eyes brightened, as if understanding meant surrender. Then I continued. You used my surgery, my signature, and my reputation because you believed your fear mattered more than my consent. He pressed both palms against the table. You always land on your feet. The old phrase sat between us. I placed the car key beside Vanessa's note. That never meant you were allowed to knock me down. No one moved. I told them I would not demand incarceration or interfere with any reasonable plea offer. I would provide an accurate statement describing the damage and their cooperation, or lack of it, nothing more. Contact with Lily and Noah would not be part of any financial agreement. Caleb would not use them to bargain with me, carry messages, or punish me. Future visits could happen only if both children wanted them and no adult discussed the case in their presence. Caleb swallowed. And us? You will repay what you took. You will correct what you said. After that, your behavior, not your need, will determine whether we have a relationship. Vanessa closed her notebook. So you're choosing paperwork over family. I closed the brown folder. No, I'm choosing a family in which my name still belongs to me. Caleb looked toward the door, waiting for someone to soften the sentence. No one did. He signed the repayment agreement first. Vanessa signed after him. When the papers were complete, I picked up my key and left Lily's drawing inside the folder. I was not ready to discard the hope it represented, but I was finished letting Hope sign documents on my behalf. The prosecutor eventually offered Caleb and Vanessa separate plea agreements. Neither went to prison. Caleb pleaded guilty to 1 count of felony forgery and received 3 years of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, and mandatory financial counseling. Vanessa accepted responsibility for identity fraud and received probation under similar terms. Both were ordered to comply with the civil repayment agreement. Some relatives called that lenient. Others called it cruel. I called it documented. Vanessa sold the remaining willow and thread inventory for $4,700. Most of it went toward restitution. Caleb worked weekend shifts for a commercial delivery company and began sending payments every month. They were not always on time. When one was late, Laura's office contacted their attorney. I no longer made reminder calls or accepted stories about broken appliances, school expenses, or unaccepted bills. Their emergencies remained real. They simply stopped becoming mine automatically. The mortgage lender approved a modification, so they kept the house. Natural consequences did not leave my grandchildren homeless, and I was grateful for that. But the rescue came through paperwork, reduced spending, and extra work. The choices Caleb should have made before deciding my car was easier. Vanessa sent written corrections to everyone who had received her false version. Her message was brief and uncomfortable. Evelyn did not authorize the sale of her vehicle. Statements questioning her memory were inaccurate. She did not apologize publicly. The agreement did not require one. Privately, she sent me a longer letter explaining that fear had made her act outside her values. I placed it in the brown folder without answering. Fear could explain a decision. It could not repay trust. Elaine began visiting once a week. She brought coffee instead of advice and stopped carrying messages between Caleb and me. When she apologized again, she named what she had done. I protected myself from conflict by asking you to absorb it. That was enough to begin rebuilding, but not enough to pretend nothing had happened. Caleb and I had limited contact. For 6 months, we spoke only about Lily, Noah, or repayment. He was not allowed a key to my house, access to my accounts, or responsibility for my medical care. The first time he came inside again, he stood beneath the empty hook beside the door. "You still don't trust me," he said. "No," I answered, nodded slowly. A year earlier, I would have rushed to soften that truth. Instead, I let it remain accurate. Trust was not a family entitlement. It was an account he had overdrawn and would have to rebuild one deposit at a time. Lily and Noah resumed Sunday visits with me. We made cinnamon toast, played cards, and talked about everything except the case unless they asked a direct question. When Lily wondered whether I was still angry with her father, I told her adults could love someone and still require them to repair harm. My recovery continued. The blue hospital permit eventually expired, and I removed it from the CRV's mirror. I did not throw it away. I placed it in the brown folder beside Lily's drawing and the dealership photograph. The new car key now hangs beside my door. Only one key, mine. After 34 years in payroll, I know a balanced record does not mean every loss is returned exactly as it was. Some entries remain permanent. The goal is not to erase them. It is to stop hiding them in the wrong column. My son sold my car because he believed I would survive the loss and eventually protect him from the consequences. He was right about only one thing. I survived. But landing on my feet no longer means giving everyone permission to push me. When has your strength been used as an excuse to take more from you? Share your story and subscribe.